Here's what I used to clean the pistons up with. They get pretty carboned up and look pretty nasty. Anyway, this mineral spirits works pretty good. Yeah, you can see this one's pretty darn nasty. So anyway, just let it soak in here for an hour or two, and it'll loosen everything up. And then once it's all softened up, that carbon, you can take a wire brush, brass brush, and just clean it up, or a scour pad of some sort, something that's not going to gouge into the aluminum. But you can see that that's already changing color. I mean, there's stuff just coming off of it already. So I just let it soak for a few hours. Well, this really surprises me. There appears to be what is rust on the oil ring. I'm not sure why. It's not metallic, or it's metallic, but it's not magnetic. But I don't know, maybe there is iron in it. Anyway, I think I'm gonna take these rings off while cleaning them. You can see the carbon is pretty caked on here, really thick. These rings don't want to move a whole lot, you know, and they should be able to expand and move around a little bit. So I think I'm just going to remove those while I clean it, and get all the gunk and carbon out of the grooves, and then reinstall the rings. All right, after putting much effort into cleaning up these pistons, it's very time consuming and messy, but I got most of the carbon off of them. And I've heard a lot of good things about ultrasonic cleaners, so I decided to give it a try. So I went out and bought this one at Harbor Freight. So I'm gonna see how well it cleans up the remainder of this piston. So I'm using the mineral spirits, and I filled it up a little bit below the mineral line here. So I'm gonna put the piston in here and turn it on. Then we'll come back after the cycle finishes, and we'll see how well it does. All right, FYI, I did run this through a couple cycles, maybe 3 cycles of cleaning with this. And I pulled the piston out. It looked very similar as it did when it went in. However, I was able to take a brush and then scrape the remainder of the carbon off with minimal effort. So I would say it definitely did help. And I went one step further. I took all the rings off, and then I put those in separately, and then cleaned those up as well. They cleaned up pretty good, and those actually discolored the solution inside the ultrasonic cleaner. So definitely some material came off of that. So anyway, I got most of the carbon off, so I feel like it's probably safe to go ahead and put the rings back on, and then just follow the same procedure with the remainder of them and put the thing back together. Now, I apologize, I didn't get a lot of the cleaning procedures on video, but there's also a fair amount of carbon that had built up in these rings here. So I took this little pick here, and then once the rings were off, kind of went up and down and around inside these rings here, and quite a bit of carbon came out. So anyway, I just want to let you know that the inside of these grooves here are all clean and free of debris now. When putting the oil ring back onto the piston, if you look at this piston closely, as you spin it around here, you will see that on one side, on the upper portion, you have this little notch here. That little notch is to coincide with only one of these, one of the 2 rings have a little protrusion on it. You can see here. Let's see. Let's see, right there, there's a little protrusion on that ring. There, I think you can see it there. That is to coincide with that little hole right here. So when you put it back in, that should protrude upward into that little space. Also, when it comes to the compression ring and the oil scraper ring, these little gaps should be 180 degrees opposite of one another. So here's the compression ring, the one on top. I set it on that side, and then on the oil scraper ring, the gap's on the other side. If we were getting new rings, then we would have to put them into the cylinders and then measure the ring gap and then potentially file them down. But since these are the stock ones going right back onto the piston, no need to do that. After much time spent cleaning and removing carbon deposits from the pistons, we're finally done. Now would be a good time to install the rear main seal. Before you install it, go ahead and put a little bit of oil around the inner portion of the seal. That way it'll slide on easily around the shaft, the crankshaft here. And let's see, push on there and get started a little bit. And then just lightly tap around. All right, and then once you got it evenly around the sides there, continue to tap it in little by little, and just work your way around it. And then just keep tapping it until the seal is flush with this outer ring here. All right, before we install the pistons into the block, what we want to do is put some assembly lube around this and work it into the rings so that they're well lubricated. And then we'll also want to put some assembly lube inside the cylinder. That way on the initial startup, there'll be some lubrication there. All right, I'm also going to use a little bit of oil and just rub it around the piston skirts here. And then also a little bit of oil on the end of the connecting rod. I know you can't see this, but a little bit of oil where the wrist pin was sliding to. Just make sure everything that moves in there is lubricated. Also, make sure that the compression ring and the oil scraper ring are 180-degree offset. You can see the gap here in the compression ring, and then here's the gap in the oil scraper ring, so they're 180-degree offset. And the two dots here, that will be installed with the piston towards the front of the motor. So this particular one here is for cylinder 4, so I'm going to start in the back, working my way up. So when I drop it in, these two dots will be facing towards the front of the motor. But we first need to compress the springs, or the rings, before we can install that. So I got this little piston installer here. And I'll just turn this around, compress the ring. And let's see, when I do this, I like to leave a little bit of the skirt showing here at the bottom. That way it kind of aligns here before you start tapping it in. So anyway, that's there. And then I'll take something soft, like the end of this rubber mallet here, and then just start lightly tapping. Should go pretty easy with no resistance. Once it's all the way in there, you're good. And then we'll need to turn the crank and then push this down to where everything lines up from the access port here on the side. And then we can go ahead and install the wrist pin. All right, now I just flip the motor over. Now we'll do number 3. Okay. Perfect. Okay, now that the piston's in there, what I'm going to do is flip the motor around so the connecting rod is hanging down. It's much easier to line it up that way. So we'll flip it back over the other direction, and then we'll move the crank until the connecting rod lines up with the piston. There we go. All right, now we can rotate the crank until the rod comes up, or hangs down into here and lines up. Okay, now we want to pound the piston in and cap it in until the hole for the wrist pin lines up with this access port here. And then, once that's lined up, then we'll flip it over on the end so the connecting rod's hanging down, and then we can turn the crank until everything lines up. Okay, now we've got the rod hanging straight down. I turned the crank to where everything's lining up. So now we can go ahead and put the wrist pin in. Be sure to lube that up. And then also make sure that the little keeper ring is on the other side of the piston so it doesn't go too far. I mean, it needs to hit that and then stop. All right, now that we got all the pistons back in, go ahead and rotate the motor and make sure everything runs smoothly with no catches. There you can also see the new nice cross hatching that we have in there. When this woodruff key is straight up, the pistons are all halfway retracted on both sides, so they're even. And just so you know that when it comes time to put the heads back on the valves, this is the position that you actually want it in. That way, when you turn the cams, none of the valves are going to hit the pistons. So with that straight up, all the pistons are retracted halfway. All right, speaking of the woodruff key, this would be a good opportunity to move it over. Usually you can just take a screwdriver blade and a hammer and just tap it out. And then move it over. And then when you hammer this down in, make sure it's fully seated. And then also make sure that it's level. There we go. And then also transfer the bolt over as well. It's now time to start sealing the block up again, and we got some new O-ring and new washers for these caps. And when we put these caps in, we want to put a little bit of RTV on both sides of these washers. Not a whole lot, but just enough to coat it. Screw these in here. And these require a 14 mm Allen head. And these get torqued down to 51 pound-feet. And again, 51 pound-feet is the spec on this. There we go. And on the back side of the motor, we got a little bit different configuration here. This is the same cap. It's on the front, but it goes behind the oil separator plate. So I'll put that on. Okay, and this one over here is just a plate with an O-ring. It's the brand new O-ring. All right, and these Phillip heads here go to 56 inch-pounds. Over here, it's not a whole lot. All right, it's time to put the oil separator plate on. If you buy these screws here brand new, you'll notice that one of them is a different color, a darker color than the other 5, and that's because this one would normally come with a sealant on it that would fit into this hole with the arrow. And so we're reusing these screws, so I'm going to use just a little bit of RTV on this guy here. All right, I've cleaned all the oil off the surfaces of the plate and its mating surface here. And we'll put like a thin layer of RTV all the way around. All right, and I have the sealant pretty much evenly spread on the block here. So now we're ready to install the plate. And I'm going to start with this one screw that needs to have sealant on it that I've already put on. And that's right in this spot, also indicated here by the arrow. And these all get torqued to 4.7 pound-feet or 56 inch-pounds. All right, now we'll torque to 56 inch-pounds. Since I'm reusing these screws that I had stripped out, I'm going to use the Torx again and then just lightly tap it in and then put the wrench on it. There we go. That works pretty good. All right, now we've dealt with everything on the back side of the motor here that we can possibly deal with at this time. So this is a good time to move it over to the engine stand since we don't have to deal with anything back here anymore. And then we'll go ahead and start working on the heads. Let's start prepping to put the heads, both heads back on. I'm gonna put a little bit more assembly lube on the inside of these cylinder walls here, just for good measure. Definitely want that first startup to be good and clean and well lubricated. In addition to the assembly lube, I'm also just gonna put a thin coat of oil around here. I think it helps distribute that assembly lube, just get it nice and even everywhere. And then once we got that lubed, and then we want to just re-clean the surface of this block here, because I'm sure we got some oil on it in the process of doing some of these other things. All right, now we need to start prepping everything to install the new ARP head studs. One of the first things that they want you to do is over on the block side, make sure that all the threads are free and clear of any debris. And what I did is I used the old head bolts with a little bit of oil and then bottomed them all out and then compared the height to make sure that they all went in evenly and that they were properly bottoming out. And then I could twist them out with no additional friction or resistance, so they're nice and clean. So no need to use a thread chaser or anything on there. Then on the underside of the head, where the gasket's going to mate up with the head, do one final cleaning. Make sure that there's no more oil or anything on the head. Also, you'll notice that there's some discolorations here. That's okay as long as you can put your fingernail over it and not feel any ridge or bumps or anything. As long as it's perfectly flat and smooth, you're okay. So just make sure that all the oil and debris is off of it. When handling the new head gaskets, I like to put on some new fresh gloves just so I don't contaminate the surface. Okay, with the head gaskets, there is no left and right. The only thing to be careful of when setting this on is to make sure that this little hole here coincides with that. You could potentially put it on this way, and if you really inspect it, you'll notice that this doesn't go anywhere. So make sure that it goes on in that fashion. All right, now we can go ahead and set the head onto the block. Okay, before dropping the head studs in, again, make sure that all the surfaces here where the washers are going to meet up are completely dry and clean and free of any debris. Important, they must be dry. Now we can start threading in the studs. And you'll notice that each one of these, it has one side with a lot of threads and the other side with fewer threads. And it's on that side, if you look at the end, you have a little Allen head there. So they're going to go in this direction. And then we'll want to thread them in until they totally bottom out. There is no torque spec for this. They just want them bottomed out and they need to move in freely. The next step is to clean each one of these washers. They don't want any oil on either side of the washer, so they say to clean it up with a dry clean rag. They do come with oil on them, as you can see. I think that's to prevent them from rusting, but before installation, that oil needs to come off. All right, I've cleaned up 6 of them for this side, and they do mention here, failure to keep these surfaces dry may result in inconsistent preloads. Okay, now the spot faces on the cylinder head where the washers reside are dry and free of oil, and the washers are clean and free of oil. We can now place them onto the end of the studs here. There we go. Next step is to lubricate the stud threads and bottom of the nuts with the ARP Ultra Torque Fastener Assembly Lubricant, which is this stuff. The thing is, with the head studs so far down in there, it's going to be difficult to get lubricant on them. So I'm not going to pull them out, but I'm going to back them off just enough to get the lubricant on them. And then I'll just run them back down finger tight. Okay, now that I got them up here, now I have decent access. Okay, I'll just repeat it on all of these and then run them down again hand tight. All right, now I have lubricant on all the threads, so I'll run them back down. Okay, and then we'll run them down all hand tight. And once these are all ran down, again, just visually inspect them to make sure that they're all the same height and that they're fully bottomed out. And just to verify, I'm going to use this micrometer here with the depth gauge just to make sure that these are all the same depth. Yep, those look great. Now we need to lubricate just the bottom of these nuts. Okay, now we'll just run all these nuts down hand tight. It is a 14 mm 12-point socket. It looks like with these all snug down by hand, it looks like there's about one thread exposed on the stud, and they're all consistent. So again, that confirms everything's down in place where it should be. And now the torque sequence here is we're going to do it in 3 different stages, 30, 60, and then 90. And we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so here we go with 30. And we'll ramp it up to 60, repeat the process again, and then once again at 90. All right, now 60. Okay, now to 90. All right, before we go any further, I just want to do the leak down test again at this point because it's so easy to do, and I don't even have to worry about cam position or top dead center at this point because I don't have the cams on, so the valves are fully closed all the time on all the cylinders. So let's see, I'll recalibrate this thing again here, and we'll go up to where it maxes out at 0 on the right, and that's at 31 psi. So go ahead and put this back in. And then we'll run up to 31 psi and then see what our leak down is. PSI. Looks like we're right there at about 3 or 4% leak down, which is where we were before, so that's great. That means our valves are sealing, our piston rings are sealing, everything looks great. And then I'll do the same thing for all the cylinders, and then that way I feel good about putting the rest of the motor back together, knowing I'm not going to have a problem with compression. All right, we just checked cylinder 4. Now we're going to check number 2. See what it does. And 1 looks like around 3-4%, so we're right on. All right, I just followed the same procedure and finished up the right side head. So now we'll do the leak down test on this side. Make sure it's as good as the one on the other. So let's ramp this up. Let's see what we got here. Okay. And then there we are, 3 or 4% again. Looks good. And then we'll do cylinder number 1. And yeah, looks like maybe even 2%, so really good. All right, well, we went a little long on this segment, but at least we have a motor that's starting to resemble a boxer engine again. So anyway, at least we were able to finish up the short block, and now we got the heads on, we can start working on the long block portion of it. So we'll just continue from here on the next video. Till then, see you next time.